The origins of the siege weapon, so deadly it would eventually be banned forever, trace back to a period when warfare was defined by patience, ingenuity, and sheer brutality. In ancient civilizations, fortified cities were considered nearly impregnable, their towering walls and strategic positioning serving as both defense and symbol of power. Armies could lay siege for months, even years, and victory often relied less on numbers and more on innovation. It was in this context that visionaries and military engineers began to push the limits of what was possible, experimenting with machines designed to shatter stone, splinter timber, and strike terror into the hearts of defenders. Among these creations, one weapon would rise above all others, not only for its destructive capability but for the moral and political dilemmas it would create. The inventor of this weapon remains a figure shrouded in mystery, celebrated in some accounts as a genius and condemned in others as reckless. Records suggest that he or they were driven by more than a desire for military superiority. There was an obsession with perfection, a compulsion to create something that could dominate the battlefield completely. Their society, meanwhile, provided both the resources and the incentive, a culture that revered technological prowess and conquest, yet one that was increasingly aware of the human cost of war. The weapon's creation was thus as much a cultural phenomenon as a technical one, embodying the ambitions, fears, and contradictions of its age. From the very first demonstration, the siege weapon inspired awe and dread. Crowds of soldiers and onlookers would gather to witness it in action, the sheer scale of the machine amplifying its psychological impact. Unlike previous siege engines, which relied primarily on brute force or clever engineering, this weapon introduced an element of terror that was almost theatrical. Its operation was complex, requiring skilled operators who were themselves exposed to danger, highlighting a tension between human ingenuity and vulnerability. The anticipation surrounding its first deployment was palpable. Stories of immense walls crumbling and enemy troops fleeing in panic began circulating even before the weapon saw real combat. The emotional resonance of its invention extended beyond the battlefield. Leaders who supported its creation were hailed as visionary strategists, their reputation soaring, while rivals and critics warned of unforeseen consequences. The narrative tension is striking. The promise of unparalleled power, the potential to end wars swiftly, clashed with the anxiety of uncontrollable destruction. This contrast between ambition and fear would become a defining characteristic of the weapon's story, creating dramatic stakes that carried forward into every subsequent engagement. Equally significant were the political implications. States recognized that possession of such a weapon could shift the balance of power, making some rulers bold and aggressive while others grew desperate and defensive. Diplomats and generals speculated about countermeasures, alliances, and the potential for escalation, all while the weapon remained in the shadows, a latent threat whose mere existence altered strategies and negotiations. The psychological warfare it imposed was nearly as impactful as its physical capability, illustrating that innovation in military history often operates on multiple levels: technological, tactical, and emotional. By the end of this period, the stage was set for the weapon's dramatic entry into history. Its creation marked a turning point not only in siegecraft but in the broader understanding of the costs and consequences of war. Audiences today can almost feel the tension of those early moments, the exhilaration of witnessing something unprecedented, tempered by the chilling awareness that no force, no matter how clever, is entirely controllable. It was a weapon born of brilliance and hubris, and from its very inception, it carried the seeds of both triumph and tragedy. The true terror of the siege weapon lay not just in its presence but in the way it functioned. Unlike earlier engines that relied on simple brute force, this machine combined ingenuity, precision engineering, and sheer destructive potential in a way that few could anticipate. Historical accounts describe massive frames of reinforced timber and metal, meticulously assembled to harness the power of tension, counterweights, and momentum. Every component was carefully designed, from the thick ropes coiled to store immense energy to the launch mechanisms capable of propelling enormous projectiles over great distances. The sophistication of the weapon made it both awe-inspiring and deeply frightening, demonstrating the advanced understanding of physics and mechanics possessed by its creators. For contemporary observers, it must have seemed almost supernatural, a force capable of bending stone and shattering defenses as though reality itself had been rewritten. Operation of the weapon required highly trained specialists, often selected from among the most skilled engineers and craftsmen available. Their training was perilous, as a single miscalculation could result in catastrophic failure or even death. The coordination needed to load, aim, and fire the weapon was painstaking, yet the reward was devastating efficiency on the battlefield. Siege engines of this scale could destroy walls in hours that would have taken conventional forces days or weeks to breach. This capability gave commanders an unparalleled tactical advantage, allowing them to achieve psychological dominance over defenders even before the first stone or bolt struck its mark. The weapon's presence alone could demoralize entire garrisons, forcing surrender or retreat without a single soldier stepping onto the battlefield. What set this weapon apart from its predecessors was not only the scale of its destruction but the unpredictability of its consequences. In early deployments, unexpected factors such as wind, terrain, or misaligned projectiles often caused collateral damage, affecting allies and non-combatants as well as the intended targets. Reports describe entire neighborhoods obliterated, fortifications reduced to rubble, and soldiers struck down by flying debris, highlighting the moral and ethical dilemmas faced by commanders who wielded it. Each use carried with it the thrill of power and the dread of uncontrollable outcomes, creating a tension that loomed over every decision. This duality, extraordinary effectiveness versus enormous risk, would define the weapon's historical reputation and foreshadow the eventual restrictions imposed upon it. The psychological impact on both attackers and defenders cannot be overstated. Soldiers operating the weapon were acutely aware of their responsibility and the stakes involved, while those facing it often experienced paralyzing fear. Contemporary chroniclers recount moments of panic as massive projectiles tore through walls, sending defenders scrambling or surrendering en masse. The weapon transformed the very nature of siege warfare, turning what had once been drawn-out engagements into immediate crises of survival. For historians, these accounts offer more than just technical detail. They reveal the emotional weight carried by every individual involved, illustrating how technology can shape human experience as profoundly as it shapes the physical battlefield. By combining mechanical genius with psychological dominance, the siege weapon became more than a tool of war. It became a symbol of the terrifying potential of human innovation. Its existence forced armies to rethink tactics, reshaped strategic priorities, and instilled a lasting sense of awe and dread. The consequences of its use would ripple through history, leaving a legacy of both fear and fascination that persists in historical memory to this day. The first battles in which this devastating siege weapon was deployed revealed both its immense power and the unforeseen consequences of its use. Armies that had once relied on traditional siegecraft, battering rams, ladders, and catapults, found themselves facing a force that could obliterate walls in hours and create chaos in what had been considered secure fortresses. Historical records described the astonishment of commanders as entire sections of fortification crumbled under the relentless assault, leaving defenders scrambling to adjust. The weapon became a tool not only of destruction but of psychological warfare, instilling fear, confusion, and despair among those who thought themselves safe behind centuries-old walls. Civilians, too, were caught in its shadow, and contemporary accounts note the panic and helplessness of those who had no part in the conflict yet faced its indiscriminate power. Despite its successes, early deployments highlighted the weapon's unpredictability. Misfires and malfunctions were common, and even slight errors in timing or alignment could result in catastrophic accidents. Stories recount instances in which the weapon turned on its own operators, killing or injuring those charged with unleashing its fury. These episodes underscored a critical truth: mastery over the weapon required not only technical skill but also extreme caution, and even then, absolute control was impossible. The line between triumph and disaster was razor-thin, giving each engagement a high-stakes tension that magnified both the drama and the danger of its use. Commanders had to weigh the potential advantages against the moral and human cost, knowing that their decisions could devastate allies and innocents as easily as enemies. The weapon's initial victories brought glory but also scrutiny. Rivals, both within and outside the states that deployed it, began to question its use, raising ethical, strategic, and political concerns. Was it fair, or even honorable, to wield a machine capable of leveling entire districts? Could such power destabilize the balance of regional politics, or provoke a catastrophic escalation in warfare? These questions added a layer of intrigue and tension, transforming what might have been a straightforward military success into a complex historical episode rich with moral and emotional resonance. Leaders were celebrated for their ingenuity yet condemned for their recklessness, creating a narrative full of contrasting human emotions, pride, fear, and the haunting awareness of unintended consequences. Beyond the battlefield, the weapon forced armies to rethink their approach to warfare entirely. Traditional defensive strategies became obsolete almost overnight, as fortifications designed to resist conventional assault proved powerless against the new threat. Soldiers and engineers scrambled to devise countermeasures, while planners revised entire campaigns in response to the machine's devastating efficiency. This shift underscores the broader impact of innovation. A single technological leap could alter not just individual battles, but the trajectory of entire wars and the course of civilizations. As these early encounters unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the siege weapon was a force both celebrated and feared. Its story was not just one of technical mastery, but of ambition, human error, and the tension between awe-inspiring power and uncontrollable danger. The duality of its impact, triumph and tragedy, hope and despair, would shape both its immediate historical significance and its enduring legacy, foreshadowing the ethical debates and eventual prohibitions that would follow. The siege weapon reached its apex during the battles that would define its reputation as both a marvel and a curse. Commanders who had mastered its deployment used it to strike fear and decisively tilt the balance of power. Fortresses that once seemed invulnerable fell in astonishingly short periods, with walls crumbling under repeated volleys and defenders forced to abandon positions that had withstood generations of conflict. Contemporary accounts emphasize the emotional intensity of these moments. Soldiers watched in awe and terror, commanders grappled with the tension between strategic brilliance and the catastrophic potential of their own creation, and civilians experienced the sheer unpredictability of devastation from which they could find no refuge. The weapon's presence transformed the battlefield, turning it into a stage where courage, fear, and desperation intersected in dramatic and unforgettable ways. The ethical and political stakes were equally significant. Leaders realized that such immense destructive power could destabilize entire regions, provoking retaliation, alliances, or uprisings far beyond the battlefield itself. Some rulers hesitated to use the weapon at full capacity, fearing the potential backlash, while others embraced its terrifying efficiency with a mixture of pride and apprehension. These contrasting approaches created high-stakes drama in both historical records and modern interpretations, highlighting the tension between ambition and restraint. Every deployment was a gamble. Triumph brought glory, while miscalculation could result in catastrophic losses, not only of resources but of human life. The weapon's sheer potential for both success and disaster elevated it from a mere instrument of war to a symbol of human ingenuity pushed to its extreme. Historical chronicles describe moments of stunning reversal, when careful planning met unpredictable outcomes. Even the most experienced operators could not fully control the projectile's trajectory or the structural reactions of targeted fortifications. Entire sections of walls would collapse unexpectedly, creating chaos on both sides, or debris would ricochet and strike friendly forces. Such incidents reinforced the perception that the weapon was as much a danger to its wielders as to its intended victims, intensifying the tension and suspense surrounding every use. The unpredictability of its power made each battle a gripping spectacle, combining tactical calculation with raw uncertainty and human vulnerability. By the end of these decisive engagements, authorities recognized the need to impose limits. The destructive capability of the siege weapon had reached a point where it no longer served only military objectives but threatened societal stability, moral norms, and political structures. The debates surrounding its control and eventual prohibition are a testament to the profound impact the weapon had on both strategy and ethics. Its apex was therefore not only measured in walls toppled and cities conquered but in the intense emotional, political, and ethical challenges it created. The decision to ban it forever reflected the recognition that some forms of power, no matter how ingeniously crafted, could not be safely contained. In this climactic period, the siege weapon emerged as both the pinnacle of military engineering and a cautionary tale. Its operational peak showcased extraordinary tactical brilliance and strategic daring, yet also highlighted the human and societal costs of innovation pushed beyond safe limits. The story of its apex captures the dramatic contrast between ambition and consequence, and sets the stage for the lasting legacy that would follow, a legacy intertwined with awe, fear, and the enduring question of how far humanity should go in its pursuit of power. The aftermath of the siege weapon's use revealed consequences far beyond the battlefield. Cities that had once stood as symbols of power and security were reduced to ruins, and the human cost became painfully evident. Civilians, who had no part in military decisions, bore the brunt of the destruction, experiencing displacement, starvation, and trauma. Soldiers who operated the weapon often carried guilt alongside their prestige, haunted by the collateral damage caused by their hands. Leaders faced political backlash, as rivals and allies alike grappled with the destabilizing effects of a weapon so destructive it could shift the balance of entire regions. This period was marked by uncertainty, moral reckoning, and the difficult realization that technological innovation, while a source of power, could unleash consequences beyond control. The weapon's reputation spread quickly, creating both fear and fascination across neighboring civilizations. Histories describe whispers of its devastating potential, inspiring caution among armies that had yet to face it and admiration among those who sought to replicate it. Attempts to reverse engineer or reproduce similar machines were frequent but often ended in disaster, highlighting the extraordinary skill and knowledge required to wield such power. These failures reinforced the mystique of the original weapon, portraying it as a marvel that could not easily be matched. At the same time, tales of its uncontrollable nature served as cautionary lessons about the limits of human ingenuity and the dangers inherent in overreaching ambition. Politically, the weapon catalyzed dramatic shifts. Alliances formed in response to its existence, as states sought protection against a force capable of annihilating fortifications and altering the outcome of wars. Diplomats and generals debated strategies to counter its power, while some rulers resorted to secrecy or deception to preserve their advantage. The presence of the weapon altered not only military tactics but also the broader balance of power, making diplomacy as critical as direct confrontation. In many ways, the weapon's legacy in this period was less about the battles it won and more about the strategic ripple effects it created, shaping conflicts and negotiations for decades. Emotionally, the period following its use was charged with tension, awe, and fear. The weapon's destructive potential forced societies to confront the ethical dilemmas of wielding such power. Victory came with moral ambiguity, and every triumph reminded contemporaries that unchecked innovation could produce irreversible consequences. Chroniclers emphasized both the spectacle and the horror, creating narratives that underscored the duality of human achievement and human folly. Leaders who once celebrated their engineering genius now faced the sobering realization that their creation had taken on a life of its own, one that demanded restraint, reflection, and ultimately, prohibition. The aftermath set the stage for the weapon's permanent ban. It was a recognition that some technological advancements, no matter how brilliant, could not be safely integrated into society. The story of this period captures the stark contrasts between human ambition and vulnerability, innovation and catastrophe, and the fleeting nature of power when weighed against ethical responsibility. The legacy of destruction, moral conflict, and political upheaval ensured that the weapon would be remembered not merely as a tool of war, but as a symbol of both human ingenuity and the dangers of unbridled ambition. The legacy of the siege weapon endured long after its ban, leaving an indelible mark on military history, engineering, and ethical debates. Even centuries later, historians and strategists study its design, marveling at the ingenuity and technical skill required to construct and operate such a machine. It became a symbol of human ambition pushed to its limits, demonstrating both the brilliance of its creators and the dangers of unchecked power. While it no longer existed on the battlefield, its story influenced the development of future weaponry, inspiring innovations in siegecraft while also serving as a cautionary tale about the consequences of excessive destructive potential. Armies learned that mastery of technology must always be balanced with discipline, foresight, and ethical considerations. The siege weapon also left a psychological imprint. Tales of its devastating capacity circulated widely, shaping cultural memory and folklore. Leaders and soldiers who had lived in its shadow carried with them the lessons of restraint, fear, and respect for the destructive forces they commanded. Across civilizations, its story became a reference point whenever engineers or strategists considered creating new weapons capable of mass destruction. The moral questions it raised, about the balance between military advantage and human cost, continued to resonate, influencing debates about warfare, accountability, and the ethical use of technology. In many ways, its legend transcended history, becoming a parable of both innovation and hubris. Strategically, the weapon's influence persisted long after its physical form vanished. Armies revised their fortification designs, defensive strategies, and siege tactics to account for the possibility of future technological leaps. Commanders understood that no stronghold was entirely safe from a novel invention, and the awareness of this potential reshaped military planning and strategy for generations. The weapon's story highlighted a timeless truth in warfare: technological advantage can be decisive, but it carries responsibility, risk, and the ever-present possibility of unintended consequences. In reflection, the siege weapon exemplifies the dual nature of human progress. It was a marvel of engineering, a tool of tactical genius, and a source of awe, yet it also embodied the perils of ambition and tempered by foresight. Its existence reminds us that innovation carries consequences far beyond immediate objectives, affecting lives, societies, and the course of history itself. Even as historians analyze its mechanics, study its battles, and debate its ethical implications, the weapon retains an almost mythical status. Its story closes with a powerful reminder: humanity's pursuit of ultimate power can achieve extraordinary feats, but without wisdom, foresight, and restraint, such feats can become a legacy of both brilliance and destruction, leaving an unforgettable mark on the world.